Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 2 on Research Fundamentals and Philosophy of Science. Today we'll explore the essential distinctions in the research landscape that shape how inquiry is conducted across disciplines. I'm Angel Reyes, and I'll guide you through understanding the varied approaches researchers take when investigating questions about our world. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to confidently differentiate between basic and applied research approaches and understand their unique contributions. You'll identify where various research methodologies fall on the qualitative to quantitative continuum and appreciate the strengths of each. Additionally, you'll recognize how research traditions vary across disciplines and why these variations matter. Understanding these distinctions will equip you to select appropriate methodologies for different research questions and recognize the value of methodological diversity. The research landscape is diverse and multifaceted. We can categorize research in many important ways. First, by purpose, the fundamental reasons why we conduct research, whether for knowledge creation or problem solving. Second, by approaches, the overarching strategies researchers employ to investigate questions, including experimental, observational, or interpretive methods. Third, research exists within traditions, the historical and disciplinary contexts that have shaped acceptable methodological practices over time. Finally, researchers employ specific methods, the precise techniques and tools used to collect and analyze data. Today we'll focus primarily on purposes and approaches, though we'll touch on traditions as well since they profoundly influence research design choices. One of the most fundamental distinctions in the research world is between basic and applied research. Basic research, sometimes called pure or fundamental research, seeks knowledge for its own sake. It aims to expand our theoretical understanding without necessarily seeking immediate practical applications. It answers why and how questions about fundamental phenomena. Applied research, by contrast, focuses on solving specific real-world problems. It has direct practical utility and aims to address identified challenges or improve existing practices. While this distinction helps us understand research purposes, most research exists somewhere on a continuum between these ideal types, rather than fitting neatly into one category. Now let's examine basic research more closely through its defining characteristics. Its primary purpose is to generate new knowledge and deepen our understanding about fundamental principles or phenomena. The research questions tend to be broad and focus on underlying processes, mechanisms, or relationships. Basic research typically occurs in controlled environments, such as laboratories, allowing researchers to isolate variables of interest and minimize confounding factors. The timeline is usually long-term and open-ended, without pressure for immediate practical outcomes. The primary outcome is theoretical advancement that expands the boundaries of human knowledge. The audience consists mainly of academic and scientific communities who build upon this knowledge. For example, a cognitive psychologist investigating how working memory functions is conducting basic research, seeking to understand fundamental cognitive processes without necessarily focusing on immediate applications. In applied research, there are distinctly different characteristics. Its primary aim is to solve practical problems or improve existing practices. Research questions are specific and context-bound, addressing particular challenges in real-world settings like workplaces, communities, or clinical environments. The timeline is typically defined by practical needs and may be shorter or more structured than basic research. The intended outcomes include interventions, products, policies or improved practices that address identified problems. The audience extends beyond academia to include practitioners, policymakers, organizations, and the general public. For example, an educational psychologist testing specific memory techniques to improve student performance in classroom settings is conducting applied research. The focus is on developing practical solutions rather than just expanding theoretical understanding. Rather than viewing basic and applied research as completely separate categories, we can understand them as points on a continuum with various intermediate positions. This spectrum ranges from pure basic research, focused solely on fundamental understanding, to use inspired basic research with potential applications in mind, to applied research, addressing specific problems, to development work, creating specific products or interventions. Connecting these points are important bridging approaches like translational research, which explicitly moves findings from basic to applied contexts, and action research, which combines inquiry with implementation. For example, research on memory processes might inform the development of memory improvement techniques, which could then be incorporated into an educational app or program. This continuum perspective helps us appreciate how knowledge moves from theory toward application through interconnected research efforts. Basic and applied research have a deeply complementary relationship that creates a virtuous cycle in knowledge advancement. Applied research often identifies knowledge gaps or puzzling phenomena that require more fundamental investigation, thereby generating questions for basic research. Conversely, basic research provides the foundational understanding and theoretical frameworks that enable innovative, practical applications. Both approaches require methodological rigor and contribute valuable knowledge to society, though in different ways and timeframes. The most effective research ecosystems value and support both approaches, recognizing their interconnected contributions. Universities, research institutes, and funding agencies increasingly acknowledge that the traditional division between pure and applied research oversimplifies the complex reality of how knowledge advances and innovations emerge. Another crucial distinction in research approaches is the qualitative-quantitative continuum. Qualitative research primarily deals with words, meanings, processes, and experiences. It tends to be inductive, building understanding from detailed examination of relatively few cases through intensive engagement. Quantitative research focuses on numbers, measurement, and relationships between variables. It tends to be deductive, testing predetermined hypotheses with larger samples to establish patterns and relationships. Qualitative approaches prioritize depth and context, while quantitative approaches emphasize breadth and generalizability. While these approaches differ in their focus, data types, and analytical methods, they represent complementary ways of understanding phenomena rather than opposing or competing approaches. Qualitative research explores the depth and richness of human experiences, meanings, and processes. It uses methods such as in-depth interviews, participant observation, focus groups, and document analysis to collect detailed, contextual data. Common qualitative approaches include ethnography, which examines cultural practices and meanings within groups; grounded theory, which systematically builds theoretical understanding directly from data; case studies, which investigate phenomena within bounded contexts; and phenomenology, which explores lived experiences. Qualitative approaches are particularly valuable for understanding complex social processes exploring new or poorly understood areas, capturing the perspectives and voices of participants, and developing nuanced theoretical insights about how and why phenomena occur in particular contexts. Quantitative research examines relationships between variables through numerical measurement and statistical analysis. Its methods include surveys with standardized measures, controlled experiments, structured observations with quantified coding schemes, and analysis of existing numerical datasets. Common quantitative approaches include experimental designs that manipulate variables to test causal relationships, correlational studies that examine associations between variables without manipulation, descriptive studies that characterize populations through measurement, and predictive studies that use existing patterns to forecast outcomes. Quantitative approaches excel at testing clearly defined hypotheses, identifying patterns across large groups, controlling for confounding variables, establishing generalizability to broader populations, and producing findings with statistical precision. Mixed methods research intentionally combines qualitative and quantitative approaches to address complex questions that benefit from multiple perspectives. By integrating these approaches, researchers can capture both breadth and depth, examine both patterns and processes, and increase the validity of findings through triangulation of different data sources. Mixed methods designs may be sequential, one approach followed by another, concurrent, both approaches implemented simultaneously, or embedded, one approach nested within the predominantly other approach. For example, a study of educational interventions might use surveys to measure outcomes across many students, while also conducting interviews to understand how and why the intervention works for different individuals. Mixed methods research recognizes that many significant research questions benefit from multiple forms of evidence and analytical perspectives. And different research questions require different methodological approaches, a principle sometimes called methodological appropriateness. Questions about frequency, magnitude, or relationships between variables typically call for quantitative methods. Questions about meaning, process, context, or lived experience are often better addressed through qualitative approaches. By embracing methodological pluralism, we recognize that all approaches have value when appropriately matched to research questions. Just as a carpenter selects different tools for different tasks, a researcher should select methods based on the nature of the inquiry, not personal preference or disciplinary convention. The goal is not to declare one methodology superior to others, but to expand our methodological toolkit so we can address diverse research questions with the most appropriate approaches. Research traditions vary considerably across academic disciplines, reflecting their different subject matter, historical development, and epistemological foundations. Natural sciences typically emphasize experimental and quantitative approaches with controlled testing of hypotheses about observable phenomena. Social sciences employ both quantitative and qualitative methods, reflecting their focus on both patterns and meanings in human behavior and social structures. Humanities often use interpretive, historical, and critical approaches to examine texts, artifacts, and cultural expressions. Applied fields like education, social work, and public health frequently combine multiple methodological approaches to address complex real-world problems. Understanding these traditions helps us recognize the often implicit assumptions that shape what counts as valid research in different fields. Let's consider some specific examples of disciplinary variations in research approaches. Arguably, psychology has traditionally emphasized laboratory experiments and quantitative measurement, but also includes case-based clinical research and qualitative approaches, particularly in social, developmental, and cultural psychology. Education research commonly examines both measurable learning outcomes through quantitative methods and educational experiences, and processes through qualitative approaches. Health sciences employ randomized controlled trials as a gold standard for testing clinical interventions, epidemiological studies to identify patterns in population health, and increasingly, qualitative studies of patient experiences and healthcare delivery contexts. Each discipline has developed methodological approaches suited to its particular questions, contexts, and knowledge goals. Some of the most exciting developments in research occur when methods and perspectives from different disciplines come together to address complex problems. Combining approaches allows researchers to address multifaceted questions that span traditional boundaries and require diverse forms of evidence. Research teams with members from different disciplinary backgrounds can tackle complex problems from multiple angles, bringing complementary expertise to the investigation. For example, contemporary neuroscience research might combine brain imaging techniques with qualitative interviews to understand both neural mechanisms and subjective experiences of phenomena like pain, memory, or emotion. These cross-disciplinary innovations expand our methodological toolkit and enable more comprehensive understanding of complex phenomena than any single approach could provide. So it's important to move beyond what we might call methodological tribalism, the tendency to view one's preferred research approach as inherently superior to others, and to dismiss alternative approaches as invalid or inferior. Instead, we should recognize that methods should match research questions, not vice versa. All methodological approaches have both strengths and limitations. No single method can answer all types of questions. Rather than adhering rigidly to a particular methodology due to disciplinary tradition or personal comfort, we should strive for methodological appropriateness, selecting approaches that best address our specific research questions. This methodological flexibility and respect for diverse approaches enhances the quality and relevance of research and promotes productive dialogue across methodological boundaries. As we conclude this lesson, consider these reflection questions to deepen your understanding. Where do your own research interests fall on the continua we've discussed? Are you drawn more to basic or applied questions? To qualitative or quantitative approaches? Which methodological approaches feel most natural to you based on your background and thinking style, and which might present challenges that require conscious skill development? How have the traditions in your discipline shaped your assumptions about what counts as valid or valuable research? Do you hold biases about certain approaches that might limit your perspective? Taking time to reflect on these questions can help you become more self-aware as a researcher and more open to methodological diversity.